Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I entered this auditorium about 1.5 hours back, and the first thing I told Arsalan was, Arsalan, anxiety ho rahi hai, kya karna hai? Dua karo. And Alhamdulillah, he gave me a lot of tasalli by saying that you will feel way more anxiety when you're on stage. And I go, thanks a lot for that. And मैंने कहा जी वो क्यों? इसने कहा because for the first time you would realize कि ये जो spotlight पड़ रही है, इसकी वजह से you will not be able to see anything. So Alhamdulillah, I'm blinded और मैं और मेरा नफ्स यहाँ पे रह गए हैं stage पे. That's like a really frightening start. Let's see if you can just start that. When about 1.5 decades back, I began my journey towards understanding Deen and implementing that in my life, I never knew that we're going to reach a time where we have to discuss this topic on stage. But the problem is, we live in an age of fitna, and this is going to become worse as we move on. There's an onslaught that's coming on us, and we not only have to be aware of the challenge that we as youth are facing, but also become the torchbearers of the Deen-e-Islam, which were given to us by Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I'll begin by a hadith of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in which he said, would I have to do that always? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in a hadith said that, إِذَا لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاسْنَا مَا شِئْتَ. If you don't have haya, then you can do whatever you want. And in fact, when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would have been saying that to the Sahaba would have absolutely no idea what ma shi'ta means. But unfortunately, we've reached that time frame, and may Allah Rabbul Izzat safeguard our imans, where ma shi'ta has crossed all limits. We live in a society that's empty of haya, and then the implications of that ma shi'ta is that there are no barriers, there are no limitations. There is nothing that is stopping us from just getting through that life of behayai. Before I begin, and before I give you some perspective to what the Islamic answer to this is, you need to understand that it's not me, it's not anybody. It's Allah Rabbul Izzat who is the Hadi. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to make a dua, Allahumma arini haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'a. Ya Allah, show me haqq as haqq and make me do ittiba' of it. It's not enough to understand. You've got to do ittiba' of it. And then he says, Allahumma arina batila batilan warzuqna istinaba. Ya Allah, batil kar dikhaye aur usse ijtinab naseeb farmaye. So may Allah Rabbul Izzat give us the tawfiq not to only see haqq but do ittiba' of it, and not only to see batil but do ijtinab of it. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in another hadith, so Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the next hadith, he tells the Sahaba, he tells them what? That the thing that he fears the most from his ummah is that they're going to get into the amal that Qawm Lut went through. And again, when you imagine the Sahaba who are listening from a Nabi who's full of haya, and he's trained Sahaba like Usman Razilullah Anhu, who are such that even the angels have haya from that person. So they're listening to the Nabi saying that he fears that his ummah is going to fall into that trap. So what happens when, so that's the hadith that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, that there's nothing I fear for my ummah more than the deed of people of Lut. And it's because of when you lose your haya, isna ma shaita, then you do whatever you want. What happens to a society that is going to be out of haya is that if you look at the West, the Europe that we look up to, 50% of the children born are out of wedlock. So it's not healthy families with married couples. The kids are born out of wedlock. And then there are 2.5 million people on the top 3 points websites every minute. That's like crazy. So if you look at the statistics, so there are about 2.5 million people on the top 3 point sites every single minute. 33% strongly agree that gender is not as important, and I'll come to that, what that means. 48% of 13 to 20-year-old identify as exclusively heterosexual. Again, we'll look at that term in a while. 20% of millennials identify as LGBTQ, which is lesbians, bisexuals, gays, etc., etc. How does the world get to this? Because we are used to looking at the Western lens to the life, i.e. lenses, for example, how am I looking at life? If I put on yellow glasses, everything will start to seem to me to be yellow. It's not like everything is yellow, it's because I'm looking at it from that perspective. So if you look at the West, in the pre-modern society, which is pre-1650s, the objective truth, the objective reality, the purpose of life is coming from divine. The divine concept could be skewed, for example, in different societies, and the message that they get from that skewed divine reality could also be skewed, but at least it was coming from the concept of God. But then we move on to a society which is post-enlightenment, post-industrial revolution, where you lose that divine part, and then the real purpose of life becomes progress and development. So you disconnect from Allah Rabbul Izzat, and then you just look at the material life. You forget the akhirah, and you just focus on this dunya. You forget pleasing Allah Rabbul Izzat, and you're only concerned about the material world that's in front of you, and you're just talking about developing that. And then you move on to postmodernism, which is once you've reached that development, where you've reached that epoch of technology, you've reached that epoch of infrastructural development, and all other signs of progress, so then you even lose that. And now your reality becomes a pursuit of pleasure only. So in the postmodern world, where it's a subjective reality, where it's my version of what I see and what I want to be versus your version of what you want and what you want to be, so we come to a society that is just pursuing pleasure. And the real purpose of life becomes entertainment. The real purpose of life becomes the pursuit of your base desires, which is nafs. And this is what Allah Rabbul Izzat signals to us in Quran, أَفَرَعَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Haven't you seen that person who's made his own desires his God? So from that perspective, when you look at the last 4 centuries, it starts off from enlightenment, which is rational and aql. And this is what the Muslim youth also faces. Give me an aqli daleel for this. It's not enough that Allah is saying it. It's not enough that Nabi Sallallahu is saying it. Give me a rationale for it. So that's like enlightened. For example, 2 decades back, we heard this in Pakistan, enlightened moderation, where we're only going to accept something that is acceptable to aql. But then that leads to what? That leads to a materialistic view of life, where you're just concerned about the physical world, the empirical world. Jo mere samne hai, isko behtar karna hai. And then, once you just focused on what's right in front of you, to what's right in front of me is different from what's right in front of you. So you move to a liberal culture where everybody is right. Everybody can choose to do whatever they want. Everybody can choose to live like whatever they want. And then you reach the 20th century, which in that liberated conceptualization of what life is about, you have this sexual revolution. And that sexual revolution is justified on ethical grounds, on humanitarian grounds. And why is that? Because, so who are ethics coming from? From our perspective, from a religious mindset, ethics are coming from Allah Rabbul Izzat. That's one understanding. But when you removed God from the picture, as the Europeans did, so now the ethics are being derived from a collective understanding of what's right and what's wrong. So what could have been wrong a decade back is now right, because our ethics are evolving with our collective understanding of what life should be about, what is life should be spent in pursuing. So when the pursuit of pleasure becomes the primary principle, the primary mover and shaker of life, then how do you regulate it? For example, for believers, for like Muslims, the regulator is Allah Rabbul Izzat, Nabi Sallallahu Salam. But when you remove Allah Rabbul Izzat from the picture and you remove Nabi Sallallahu Salam from the picture, so then from the Western perspective, it's like the harm principle. Haraj kya hai? Agar main ye kar raha hu, isme masla kya hai? Kisi ko nuksan to nahi de raha na? There's a famous saying of a politician, wo kehta hai, sharab peeta hu, khoon to nahi peeta na? And that kind of mindset, because as long as I'm not harming anybody, it should be fine. As long as I'm not affecting somebody, it should be fine. क्यों अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त रोकना चाहते हैं? अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त को क्यों ये मुझ पे पाबंदी लगानी थी? क्योंकि मैं किसी का नुकसान तो नहीं कर रहा. सबसे ज़्यादा मैं नुकसान किसका कर रहा हूँ? अपना. Because I'm in a test right now, and Allah Rabbul Izzat is going to ask me about that test on the day of judgment. So it's not enough, you just have the harm principle. So when you look at the West, how did they get there? The sexual revolution starts off in 1960s, where Abrahamic religion, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all of them have very similar ethical and moral underpinnings, which are going to be deriving the society. But once the society loses that, so what was a taboo, let's say 2 decades back, it's not anymore. I'll give you one example from within the Pakistani industry. कि आज से 20 साल पहले having that relationship explicit on media was like a taboo. But right now, and I'm not watching the dramas, but what I've heard is that your stars, superstars, both male and female, they're into open relationship with each another. And why is that? Because you just lost it. You come to a point where something was not acceptable, it becomes acceptable. So for example, that ummah in which niqab, haya, covering yourself, staying away from non-mahrams was like the norm. Now you've got to justify why you're covering. Why are you not exposing yourself? So that's the problem with, when you take that mindset where pleasure seeking on the basis of the harm principle becomes the primary lens with which you see life, so then you're going to come to that conclusion, as long as koi haraj nahi ho raha, so I'm fine. Shouldn't be a problem. And then deen has to be reinterpreted and given an outlook which is justifying my own self-pursuit of pleasure. And reasons for the rise in this immorality which we see in our surroundings, number one was that decline of religious values and morals. What's right and wrong, if Allah Rabbul Izzat is not the source, then what's the source? It's like you and me, and my boundaries could be different from your boundaries, and once the boundaries start to become fluid, so then eventually you would have no boundaries. Change in family values. आपने पूरे family structure को तबाह कर दिया है. वो जो एक घर में माहौल था एक single nucleus family unit का, once you get destroyed, तो फिर कोई घर के अंदर कोई बड़ा है ही नहीं. Everybody has their own say. Everybody is on the table and everybody can come up with their own solutions to the problem. And then legalization of pornography. This happens in the West, porn becomes a norm. And in Pakistan, it's not legalized, but there's restricted access to that. And once you're looking at that, so that is obviously going to bring down your haya, because that's what you're feeding yourself. And then what happens is legalization of abortion. Ye sare jo trajectory chal rahi hai, when you legalize abortion, so jo illicit relationships ka ek outcome tha, wo that was that you will get pregnated. So आप उसको avoid करने के लिए आपने legal right दे दिया कि anybody, anytime, anywhere has a legal right to abortion. So when this happens in the West, तो उसका outcome क्या निकलेगा? So I'm going to put up a box which Islam amalgamates and every other even Western civilization in the history amalgamated as well. It used to be one single box. That is sexual intimacy का मकसद क्या है? Reproduction. Because it's going to give you the next generation. And when sexual intimacy is going to lead to reproduction, where one male and one female, they're going to have a child together, which is going to be part of their family, so then what was the best possible way to make sure it's raised in a healthy environment? So you look at the West, you look at the East, you look at North, South, all cultures, all civilizations had this concept of marriage, where one male and one female who are unknown to each other, they're going to be coming in a contractual relationship, jahan pe sexual intimacy ke through the reproduction ho rahi hai, that's creating a nucleus family, which is going to lead to the next generation coming in a healthy environment. But what the West does is, कि वो इन तीनों को अलग-अलग कर देता है. वो कहता है कि sexual intimacy is like your base desire. जिससे मुझे खाना, अगर मुझे भूख लगी है, so I've got to eat. हर्ज क्या है? And if I'm really feeling thirsty, which I am, तो कब से पानी मांगा था वो कहीं आया ही नहीं है. So I'm feeling thirsty, just drink water. So it's like बिल्कुल इसी तरह, just like your body has thirst and your body has hunger, your body has a desire for sexual intimacy. And that sexual intimacy का मकसद reproduction नहीं है. Reproduction is a byproduct. करना चाहते हो करो, लेकिन नहीं भी करना चाहते तो it's fine. And that is one of the reasons the entire West right now, majority of the countries have a decreasing population, where the birth rate has gone below replacement level and they don't have a solution. For now, what they do is they let people like coming from Pakistan or other Southeast Asian economies get to them whenever they need them. But जब यहाँ पे भी वही हाल हो जाएगा तो फिर क्या होगा? So, sex, reproduction, and marriage, they were separated out. Sexual intimacy was not supposed to be for reproduction, it was to fulfill your base desire. And once you have created that dichotomy, then marriage is a lifestyle choice. हाँ, दो लोग आपस में मिलके रहना चाहते हैं because they love each other, because they've got understanding of each other, and they want to live together, तो ठीक है. नहीं भी रहना चाहते तो कोई मसला नहीं है. शादी क्यों जरूरी है? हाँ, तो वो फिर then liberals like Malala are going to come up and then they're going to say कि शादी के बगैर भी तो गुजारा हो सकता है ना? Why do you live like that? So it's a lifestyle choice. And why was it made easier? Because why sexual revolution के पीछे जो technological development चल रही है in terms of the Medicaid that's provided, that basically supplements this point. So at least to what, 1959 is for the first time in human history that you're actually able to disconnect sexual intimacy from reproduction because of the birth control pills and other successful ways that you could actually stop this consequence of sexual intimacy, i.e., whenever you're going to become sexually intimate, तो उसके लिए, उसकी वजह से you're going to get pregnant and then you're going to have the child. So you were able to break that because of this technological development in the 1960s, where you were successfully able to control the consequence of that sex is not now equal to reproduction. Hence, sexual intimacy need not be within the bounds of marriage. It's going to come outside that. And just like humans have other desires to seek out pleasure, so then you can seek out this desire as well, and you don't need to face the consequences. The consequence of the reproduction and the consequence of a marriage. And that is why when you talk to the youth, for example, जब 2010 में graduate हो रहे थे, so then the batch is generally like कि अभी तो शादी नहीं करनी है, because शादी is seen like a burden. It's a responsibility. जो आपकी 25 से 40 की age bracket है, that's when you are in your prime. That's the time when you can actually take up that responsibility. वो कहते हैं अभी तो याशी का time है, हाँ? अगर बच्चे हो गए और सारा दिन वो चीं-पां होती रही, so I don't want to get into that mindset कि बस इसी बोझ को उठाते रहो फिर अपनी जिंदगी कब गुजारनी है. And that is coming from the males and the females. But अपनी जिंदगी उस prime age में ही उस कुर्बानी को control किया जा सकता है. So now sex just becomes a pleasure tool. Just do that for pleasure, and reproduction is controlled. हाँ, अभी हम बच्चा नहीं चाहते, and we don't want to have kids. And then marriage is a lifestyle choice. करो ना भी करो तो खैर है. And please, please do not underestimate what is happening in our universities. I had the unfortunate experience for a very short time frame on coming on the disciplinary committee of UMT. And मैं फिर माफी मांग के बाहर आ गया कि ना I don't want to get involved. It's so rampant. And उसको avoid करने के लिए सिर्फ एक ही तरीका है, you need to re-own your identity, which is as a believer, as a Abdullah. And I'll talk about that later. And then this agenda is pushed through. So once West has gone through this transition where this marriage-based sexual intimacy has been broken, so then it's being promoted through literature. So you see that in novels, you see that in writings, you see that on print media, and then you see movies and dramas. And within school, university, the youth, because target for 40s and 50s wali previous generation nahi hai. The target is the youth that is going through the schooling, through the universities, that they are shown that. And any single person who comes up with this argument कि मेरे ऊपर कोई कैद होनी चाहिए right in the prime of my youth, not acceptable. Not acceptable. ये मौलवी को और कोई काम ही नहीं है. वो again, 40 minutes is too less of a time to show the repercussions of having this lifestyle choice of being intimate without a marriage contract. But that's the agenda that is pushed. So demise of the nuclear family, fatherlessness. In Europe, and many of the main countries, you've got single-parent families, where it's just the mother who's taking care of the child, because the father has moved on to something better, something more pleasurable. It's going to lead to poverty. It's going to lead to single motherhood, delinquency, which is at a young age. Any kid which has not been able to have a fatherly figure at home, the chance that they're going to be raised as responsible adults goes down. So you see more crimes amongst them, disturbed childhood, serial monogamy. अब अगर आपने उसकी बुनियादी pleasure पे रख दी है, so committed relationship where you remain as life partners, उसका तस्वुर ही नहीं है. मैं बहुत परेशानी से अपने स्टूडेंट्स को कहता हूँ कि it's even unimaginable for me to just hear this out. कि you say कि ना X and Y were girlfriend, boyfriend, and then X goes on and Y goes on, और वो कुछ 4, 5, 6 और trials करके वापस 6 महीने बाद X and Y are back together again. Like, how is that even conceptualized in terms of कि ये मेरा ये life partner है? But you because broke that chain, so you're just moving on from that. And then LGBTQ+. Once you have created that environment where sex is being pursued as a pleasure tool only, so then you move on to the next thing. Because the harm principle says that you can do whatever you want in whatever way you want as long as it's not harming others. So then why restrict yourself to in a heterosexual environment where a male is having a relationship with a female? Why restrict yourself to that? Why not male with male and why not female with female? In order to do that, because you need to have a justifiable reasoning background to it where everybody would be ready to accept that. So wo kya karte hain? The next amalgamation in every conventional society, including Islam, was broken into parts. That was biological sex. For example, I'm a biological male based on my biology, genitalia, anatomy, is what is defined by Allah Rabbul Izzat. And then my gender identity is whether I identify as a male or a female. So I am a biological male and I identify as a male. And then my sexual orientation is that I'm attracted towards the opposite gender. So I'm a biological male, I'm a gender identity ke perspective se male, and I'm a heterosexual, which the term shuru mein aaya tha, where I'm attracted to the opposite gender. So what the West does is, these three terms need not be in the same box, which was, as far as you go back into recorded history, there were anomalies, but conceptually everybody accepted this. So you move on from this amalgamation to this degeneration where biological sex is obviously determined by biology. So I can't be a biological female. I've got to be a biological male. Okay? But my gender identity, my self-perception of who am I, that need not be male. So I could choose to be a female. I could choose to be a male and a female. I could choose to be anybody. So you don't necessarily have to have a link between biological sex and gender identity. And once you break that, for example, if, na'uzu billah, I can identify as a female, then my sexual orientation becomes confused and fluid as well. So if I am a biological male who is identifying as a male, I can choose to have a relationship with male or female. That's my sexual orientation. Or if I choose to be a female, even then I can choose to have a relationship with another female or a male. So उन्होंने किया क्या कि वो amalgamation which existed from prehistoric times, उस amalgamation को अलग-अलग खानों में कर दिया. And now they're building up कि मसला क्या है? यानी कि why do I have to identify as a male? Why can't I identify as a female? What's restricting me? So usse, what they move on to is, this is the environment in which they give rise to homosexuality. So 1989, it's not like way far back. 1989, so that's the time when the Squirk and Matheson, they say, we are going to make this concept so easily acceptable all around that there's no way anybody can challenge that. So they start off with the rise of gay rights and liberation movements, कि हम भी इंसान हैं, जिस तरह आप इंसान हैं, हम आपको तो कुछ नहीं कह रहे ना. You want to be in a heterosexual relationship, you want to be in a marriage relationship, we don't have an issue with that. But why do you want to restrict us? It's my lifestyle choice. Whatever I want to do, why do you want to be restricting? So then they bombard us, which is going to desensitize us. When you're seeing that all around yourself, so then it's very hard for us not to accept it. So movies, TV shows, novels, and pop culture. So, and our kids are watching those movies. ठीक है? वो मैं Toy Story हम सबने बचपन में देखी थी, decade long ना old movie. तो मेरे बच्चे वो एक movie देख रहे थे जिसमें वो जो रोबोट वाला हीरो था, तो उसके कोई नई मूवी आई है. And then he comes back from space, and उसकी जो girlfriend थी, she is now saying in that movie, and that's what I heard, कि उसने कहा कि ना, I am engaged to her. Like she is a girl, and then she is engaged to her. So we have been bombarded by this. All of us are facing this around us, where Netflix, 70 to 80% of the content is LGBTQ+. You're seeing relationship, and you're seeing them as humans. And उसको humanize करके उसकी acceptability को बढ़ा रहे हैं. So redefinition of gender roles. जब आपने उस industrial revolution के बाद gender roles, पहले productive economy और reproductive economy के differences को ख़त्म करके, you want women to work as well. तो वहाँ तक तो probably would have been fine. Okay, now can women work? Yes, they can. But then, are they there just for reproduction? So you should be able to get that. Okay, no. Why? Because आपने sexual intimacy का outcome reproduction रखा ही नहीं है. आपने वो de-link करने के बाद, so now why do women have to restrict themselves to that role कि बस वो शादी करके बच्चे पैदा करने के लिए आई है और कोई जिंदगी में काम नहीं है, as if that was easy. तो मैं कहूंगा कि जिन्होंने नहीं किए उनसे पूछें कि 2 बच्चों को 3 बच्चों को रेज करना, लाइक हम तो याशी करते हैं अकॉर्डिंग टू माय वाइफ, जाते हैं बस जाके 4-5-6 उधर हुक्म चलाए, 4-5-6 उधर हुक्म चलाए, तो वो तो घर वाली ना परेशान है कि इन 3 बच्चों को रेस कैसे करना है. दैट्स लाइक अ मोर हेक्टिक जॉब. सो मैन एंड वुमेन की डेफिनेशन भी खत्म कर दो. पहले रोल्स मिक्स कर दो, फिर डेफिनेशन भी मिक्स कर दो. अ मैन कैन चूज टू बी अ वुमन एंड अ वुमन कैन चूज टू बी अ मैन. But what you need to understand is then even the usage of this term is irrelevant. For example, if Moeen can choose to be a woman and any woman can choose to be a man, so what does that mean then? My associating myself to the other gender, then that gender becomes a useless term to use. But ho raha hai, and then once you can do that, why behave according to expectations? मैं वो क्यों करूं जो मुझे माशरा चाहता है मुझसे करने को? Be yourself. Be your real self. जो अंदर से फीलिंग है उसको उभारने में क्या मसला है? Why do you want to restrict yourself? Not seek out the pleasure. That is your right. If they can have their pleasures on their terms, why can't we have our pleasures on our terms? So embrace it. Rather than वो जो दिल में गलत जज्बात पैदा हो रहे थे, हराम की तरफ ले जाने वाले जज्बात पैदा हो रहे थे, it's not a problem. Embrace your real self. Be your real self. ठीक है? उसमें कोई मसला नहीं है. What next? And it's already in the pipeline. This is not something like widespread, but it's in the pipeline. Incest. Because agar pleasure ही seek out करना है, so why stop yourself to the opposite gender? Why not the same gender? And then why same gender of which is unknown to you? Why not those close to you? The blood relatives के बीच में relationship. The German Ethics Council already has a case where a brother and sister, they had kids way back and are in jail for about 7-8 years now. So they have a case in the court already के why are you dehumanizing them? वो भी तो ठीक इंसान है, उनकी मर्जी उन्होंने बच्चे पैदा किए. Why do you have to criminalize it? And God forbid we are moving in that direction. And then the next thing is pedophilia. Why adults to have relationship with adults? Why not adults with kids? And I don't want to even mention the next thing, which is animals. That's the direction this West is taking us. And we, in closed eyes, are just running towards it. We don't even know what our deen has to say about it. Allah Ta'ala क्या फरमाते हैं? وَأَنَّهُ خَلَقَ الزَّوْجَيْنِ ذَكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى कि मैंने मर्द और औरत को पैदा किया. And وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. Whether you want to accept it or not, we have to be very, very firm on this कि मेरे अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त ने मर्द और औरत को अलग अलग पैदा किया और वो एक जैसे नहीं है और मुझे उसमें कोई हया नहीं है कहते हुए. I have to own it. I have to really, really own it and carry it with myself. A few definitions. Again, sex हम define कर चुके हैं, which is the biological sex that you have. Gender identity is my identity as a male or a female, and then cisgender versus transgender. Cisgender is, so for example, I'm a cisgender because I'm a biological male. I identify as a male, and then I'm attracted to the opposite gender. That's the definition for cis. Transgender is, you might be a biological male, but you associate yourself as a female, and then you could have attraction to male or female, so that's transgender. Deen इसके बारे में क्या कहते हैं? So Deen has 2 categories. ऊपर 3 लिखी हुई हैं, but the 2 categories are coming under the transgender. The one is the intersex, जिसको पाकिस्तान में खुसरा कहते हैं. ये definitions बहुत important हैं because that's how you will understand what a thing is. इस intersex को जिसको खुनसा मुश्किल कहते हैं, the Sharia does realize that it might be a possibility. Although the statistics मैंने देखे थे, that was 0.018. That's like 1 in 1,000. कि वहां पे बायोलॉजिकल डिफॉर्मिटी की वजह से उसकी कंफ्यूज्ड बायोलॉजिकल सेक्स है. इट्स नॉट रियली क्लियर इट्स अ मेल और अ फीमेल. वहां पे दीन डज रियलाइज इट एंड द दीन डज गिव यू दैट possibility that through surgical intervention you can choose to be a male or a female, but that's like really, really rare, and it's like hard to find that. What is more common, and that happens in Pakistan, is the transgender thing, which is al-mukhannas. Mukhannas kya hai? It's a biological male but with effeminate characteristics. The effeminate characteristics would be कि वो चलता औरतों की तरह है, वो बात औरतों की तरह करता है, उसकी बॉडी लैंग्वेज के अंदर वो रिफ्लेक्ट करता है, तो दैट इज समथिंग विच इज नेचुरल. अगर आर्टिफिशियल है, then that's गैर खल्की, हराम. लेकिन अगर नेचुरल है, and we all have had association with such individuals, biological males, but with effeminate characteristics, शरीयत उनको निगेट नहीं करता. शरीयत ये कहता है कि what is natural, Allah Ta'ala is not going to ask about that. But on the basis of those effeminate characteristics, what you can't do is that you cannot dress like a woman. So that male, biological male, who has effeminate characteristics cannot dress like a woman. They cannot adopt appearances of women and makeup. And by the way, a lot that you see in Pakistan on roads, most of them, and I can quote you the study, there was a PhD scholar, a Muslim scholar who came from US. He spent about 1.5 years amongst this community of Pakistan. He says a very, very predominant percentage of them are actually mukhannas. They cannot cross-dress according to the Sharia. So they cannot have sex change and reassignment surgeries. सिर्फ ये दिल में कि मुझे लगता है कि मैं औरत हूं, that does not change the reality. You're still a biological male and you must carry yourself like a biological male. What's not in your control, Allah Ta'ala is not going to ask you. And then have same-sex relationships. So for example, if I am the person who's a transgender, then they cannot have same-sex relationships according to the Sharia. What they can have is, the next is I'm going to show you the main Sunni position on this. The next slide. The main Sunni position is that those who are intersex, they can have reassignment surgeries, where their confused biology and anatomy is making it difficult for them to carry as one of the genders, so they can have reassignment surgeries. But that's very rare. What is more common and being promoted through media, and that's what most of the things that are going out around in Pakistan right now, that's prohibited according to the main Sunni position on this. Why is it important for you to understand? Well, mujhe kya lage? Because 2018, a government passes a law which is bypassing this understanding of the Sharia. Yahan pe, I'm not sure whether you're able to read this or not. You can get the slides afterwards. Transgender person ki definition mein intersex और transgender को mix किया हुआ है. Intersex वो था जहाँ पे deformed biology थी. Transgender is, there is no deformation in biology, it's your perception which is problematic. उसकी identification ही गलत की. Next. Now the parliament gives the right to that transgender person to go to Nadra and get themselves registered as a transgender woman or man. That's the problem, because that's not what Sharia is giving you the permission for. And because we were unaware of this, this is like even Europe is discussing this, we've already passed it. Although there's already a debate on this, that you have to change this from transgender to intersex. वो तो माया बी को अल्लाह ताला जन्नत नसीब करें जिन्होंने इस सारे को स्टार्ट किया. अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त खैर का काम कहाँ से किससे ले रहे हैं, वो अजीब बात है. So वो that's the person who raised this. और फिर वो जाके पार्लियामेंट में होश आई कि we are passing transgender laws in the guise of कि हम intersex को rights देना चाहते हैं. Both of them are very different categories. And implication, just one implication, because there are many, i.e., if I am a male and I categorize myself as a female, or there's a female who categorizes themselves as a male, तो उसके अंदर problem क्या आती है? वो कहते हैं transgender male gets the right in inheritance of a male. तो for example, जैसे ही बाप फौत हो, तो सारी बेटियों को अपने आप को मेल डिक्लेयर कर लेना चाहिए, क्योंकि then you get more inheritance. और जैसे वेस्ट में होता है, बाद में वापस कर लो. We can't allow that. That's one of the problems of not being aware of where the West is taking us, because it's their money and they're promoting it through. आपके World Bank और IMF के approval loan laws के अंदर ऐसी commitments भी हैं कि transgender agenda उसको promote करना है. $200 million allocated for that. The last thing that I would want to tell you people, कि ये सब पता करने के बावजूद, there might be people who've got natural problems. All of us have. None of us sitting here or speaking here are those who are perfect. हम सबके गुनाह हैं, हम सबकी problems हैं. All of us have our own challenges, and sexual intimacy is one of those. The problem यहाँ पे West क्या कर रहा है? I've written 3 words जो कि हमारे दीन में अलग-अलग थे, West ने amalgamate कर दिए. i.e., I might have a desire, लेकिन अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त ने नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम के थ्रू मुझे क्या पैगाम दिया? जब तक अमल नहीं करूंगा गुनाह नहीं मिलेगा, माफ है. अगर अमल कर भी लिया तो अभी भी तौबा का दरवाजा खुला है. You can ask Allah Rabbul Izzat for forgiveness. And even if you are acting upon it, it's not your identity. What the West does is, I feel attraction to the same gender, so I'm a gay. I feel attraction to the, like, desire ko identity bana do. That was never in history. I could be a doctor, I could be an engineer, I could be a Pakistani, I could be a Canadian. It never happened in history that my identity becomes my sexual desires. But that's the problem. LGBTQ plus kar kya raha hai? There is no concept of gay Muslim. I'm not saying that koi amal nahi kar raha hoga. There is no concept of a lesbian Muslima. Because then you're pigeonholing yourself into a mindset where jab aapko ye kaha jayega ki ye haram hai, so your very identity is being challenged as a gay or a lesbian. That's the problem. Sharia says that your sins are not your identity. Your identity is that you're Abdullah. You're Abdullah. Allah ke abdo. और Allah ताला अपने abd को क्या कहते हैं? الذين असरफوا على أنفسهم. जिन्होंने अपनी जानों पे जुल्म किया. لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله. अल्लाह की रहमत से ना उम्मीद ना हो. हम में से हर कोई are being challenged by shaitan, nafs and dunya. But that's not our primary identity. हमारी identity फिर भी ये है कि मैं अल्लाह का बंदा हूँ. And Allah Rabbul Izzat declares that very clearly. Al-yawma akmaltu lakum deenakum. हमारा दीन हमारे नबी अलैहिस्सलाम हमारे लिए पूरे पैकेज के तौर पर कंप्लीट करके गए हैं. We don't need any other lens. And then he says, وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي. ये अल्लाह की ऐसी नेमत है कि अगर इस नेमत पर हम नहीं रहेंगे तो it's going to be real problem. And then he says, وَرَزِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. मैंने तुम्हारे लिए इस्लाम को पसंद कर लिया है. So I'm a Muslim. I'm a mu'min. And that's the identity that I should be carrying. And lastly, Allah Ta'ala says in Quran, या अय्युहन नास कुलू मिम्मा फिल अर्दि हलालन तय्यबा. जो अल्लाह ताला ने हलाल दिया है दुनिया में, सिर्फ उसी के अंदर अपना गुजारा करो, उसी को लो. वला तत्तबिउ खुतुवातिश शैतान इन्नहु लकुम अदुव्वुम मुबीन. और उस रास्ते पे ना चलो जो शैतान का रास्ता है, जो गुमराही का रास्ता है. वो लेंस लगा के दुनिया को ना देखो जिसका आउटकम गुमराही है, जिसमें से वेस्ट खुद गुजर रहा है. हमें वो लेंस लगा के देखना है जो एक अब्द का लेंस है, जो एक नबी अलैहिस्सलाम के उम्मती का लेंस है. एंड देन इन्नमा यअमुरुकुम बिस्सूइ वल फहशा. वो शैतान का लेंस क्या करेगा? इट्स गोइंग टू कमांड यू टुवर्ड्स फहशात एंड मुनकरात एंड टुवर्ड्स व अन तक़ूलू अलल्लाहि मा ला तअलमून. वो तुम्हें ऐसी बातें तुमसे कहलवाएगा जो अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त के साथ एसोसिएट करनी भी प्रॉब्लमैटिक है. सो वी मस्ट एम्ब्रेस आवर आइडेंटिटी एज अ बिलीवर. वो टेक्निकल पार्ट कितना समझ आया है? We could have debates on that. I could sit with you. Anybody who has a problem, I could come back to you. But one message I would really want you to take back is that I am a Muslim. I'm a mu'min. I'm a believer in Allah Rabbul Izzat, and I'm a person who's striving for the akhirah. I'm not a person who's the material pleasure of this dunya is his final outcome. That is a byproduct. Allah Rabbul Izzat ne deen mein bahut sukoon aur itminan rakha hai, and I will want all of you to strive for that itminan in this dunya and that blissful life in the akhirah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.